Now I would like to turn the discussion to a couple of existing programs that are really making significant impacts in rural America, and that is 2 federal tax credit programs that are used to leverage equity to deploy into rural economic development and affordable housing programs. And I'm very happy to be able to introduce 2 leaders in the LISC family who are driving those efforts throughout the country, but also have a very particular rural strategy to enhance the rural promise that Lisa and Kate mentioned earlier. So what I like to do is introduce both Kevin and Mike rather, and then have each of their presentations, and then have the last third of the session available for question and answers. So like the last session, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A as we go, and then we'll address as many of them as we can. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Kevin Boes. He's the president and CEO of our New Market Support Company and has been since January 2011. He's leading the charge in expanding the company's investment activity and service offerings. Prior to that role, he was in another LISC affiliate, NEF, as the senior vice president and CFO. He did that from 2001 to 2010. He's also a CPA and spent some time with KPMG doing real estate auditing and financial services consulting. He holds a BA from University of Northern Iowa and an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. And then our other presenter today is Mike Jacobs, who's the Senior Vice President and Head of Acquisitions, overseeing the acquisition of low-income housing tax credit properties throughout the country. He's got an acute sense of investment viability and long-term business perspective, and has a talent for collaboration that helps maintain NEF's competitive edge over other syndicators. He's got more than 25 years experience in the affordable housing field, most of that with NEF. He had a brief stint with the Alliant Company, but he saw the light and came back to NEF. Prior to his work with NEF, he was a director of property and asset management at Heartland Housing in Chicago, and he also did policy work for the Ann Arbor Historic District Commission in Michigan. He's a graduate of Eastern Michigan University, and he holds a master's in urban planning from the University of Michigan. And without further ado, I'd like to bring in Kevin and ask Bisma to bring up Kevin's presentation.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to Kate and Nadia and the whole Rural LISC team for the opportunity today. I'm excited to be with you all. Wish we were together in Memphis instead of virtually, but hopefully next year. So I just have a short deck here on the work that NMSC is doing in the new markets tax credit space and beyond, and focused on what we're doing in rural markets. And then, yeah, excited for your questions and conversation to follow. So first, just a little bit more about me. So I've, as Michael said, been in the LISC family companies for 20 years now, and in my current role for 10. But what Michael didn't mention is I have a deep passion for rural investment, and myself grew up in a town of 4,000 in Northwest Iowa. So got to see the challenges of rural communities firsthand, and so excited to dive in with you all today on that. So a little more on NMSC. So we're a wholly owned affiliate of LISC. We are a unique organization in that we're both investment managers and fund service providers. So got a growing team of 30 folks. We're based in Chicago and we work around the country. We'll go in a little more into what we do here, but this slide is just a little bit of an overview of our shop. Our building of financial products and focuses on quality jobs, wealth creation, healthcare access, and all of that with prioritization towards investments that are working to close the racial health, wealth, and opportunity gaps. Our supportive partners and our fund services work is really a lot of talk about capacity building in the last sessions. We are not capacity builders, but we are capacity boosters. And so we help community investors around the country execute on their community investment strategy with an investment platform where we can help folks both from the front end of funds, helping to structure and raise capital and do financial modeling, to the execution and back office. And we'll go into a little bit more on the funds and types of partners we support. Next slide. So in the new markets tax credit space, this is where NMSC really grew up, was focused solely in the new markets tax credit space. So we manage the list new markets tax credit program and provide both our back office and fund support services to all sorts of players in the NMTC market. And just a little bit about the NMTC market and where it's at. So our industry just, as of last month, grew by 40%. So the program was extended for 5 years last year and grew from a $3.5 billion annual program to a $5 billion annual program. And there has been and continues to be a 20% set aside for rural investments within that. So the rural investment minimum just went up to $1 billion a year of investment in rural markets across the country. And we ourselves set aside 20% of each of our list allocations every year to rural investments. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we do in the rural space. Next slide. So beyond new markets tax credits, NMSC has 13 different funds under management or administration, and focusing on our impact mandates of quality jobs and wealth creation, healthcare access, but also beyond it with some of the funds we support, where we support charter school funds and housing funds, and supporting capitalizing mission lenders with a range of partners that we work with beyond the NMTC space. And next one. So what have we done with our new markets tax credits in rural America? So from inception of our new markets tax credit program today, we've made 25 different standalone rural investments across 16 states. And you can see the stats on those investments here, with focus on supporting quality, accessible jobs, and over 1,000 permanent jobs supported, and with our healthcare access, serving over 87,000 patients annually. Next one. So just going to give you a few example projects that we have in our portfolio. So this one, Revolution Fabric, is a textile manufacturer located in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. So at 35 miles or so west of Charlotte. And this is a community that where 30% of children are growing up below the poverty level, really due to a lack of quality, accessible jobs. And so with this investment, we were able to support the expansion of Revolution Fabric and bring over 100 new full-time living wage and accessible jobs to that market. Next one. So next, wanted to give a little overview of the Growing Rural Communities Fund. So in our portfolio of funds that we have launched, this is one that we started and got fully deployed here a couple of years ago, and are interested in the next iteration. And so looking for feedback and thoughts in terms of products that are going to be most beneficial to all of your programs and communities. But to spur your thinking, give you a little overview of the Growing Rural Communities Fund and what we've done there. So this was a partnership with Northern Trust Bank, $6.4 million fund, and just a little bit on the way these new markets tax credit funds work. So we're a bit unique in the new market space in that we have really specialized in not just putting new markets tax credits into standalone projects, but also inventing loan products that use the new markets tax credit. So the way this works is we set up a fund structure and a financial product. In this case, about 35% of the capital comes from the new markets tax credit equity and does not need to be repaid to the investor. They get their return through tax credits. So that really is the power of this tool. And so then the rest of the capital comes from private debt, in this case, Northern Trust Bank. The way that this powerful tool can be utilized in terms of a new markets tax credit enhanced fund is a few different ways. So one is that all that tax credit equity can act as a loan loss reserve and enable us to make more risky loans than we otherwise could. A second is to be able to use the benefit of this loan loss reserve in the structure to bring down the interest rate on the loan and provide more favorable rates and terms to the borrowers. And then the third would be a debt cancellation component of these loans where if they're successfully repaid, a portion can be canceled and stay with the business or the nonprofit that we're financing. So next slide. So what this Growing Rural Communities Fund product looked like was a 2% interest rate loan to the borrower with 7-year maturity, but a 3-year interest only period and then 25-year amort. So really a structure to keep debt service payments very low throughout the 7-year term of this investment. And this fund was just for new markets tax credit eligible census tracts in non-metro is the NMTC term for rural communities. And the requirement for 80% loan to value on real estate with this product. And next slide, and a couple of examples of investments that we made with the Growing Rural Communities Fund. So Travelers Hotel was one I was hoping to be showing you all in person this week, but not too far outside of Memphis in Clarksdale, Mississippi. So a startup boutique hotel that we financed with a $1.25 million loan. And this project was part of an economic development plan for Clarksdale and the goal of growing its tourism base. And next one, on the other side of the country in Astoria, Oregon, a new expansion of a co-op grocery store. And so a $3 million new markets enhanced loan. There's a LISC loan on this project as well, and a new co-op grocery store with expanded fresh food access in Astoria. And there's my contact information, and I look forward to the discussion after Mike's presentation. It's all yours, Mike.
Thank you, Kevin. Isma, if you could bring up Mike's slide deck, and as we're getting ready for that, I also want to mention that NEF and through Mike's leadership is a financial sponsor of the Rural Seminar this year. So thanks for your support, Mike, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I was hoping to see everybody in 3D this time too. This is one of my favorite conferences. It's such a drag that I'm doing it from my living room again, right? Again, like Lisa mentioned, like Kevin mentioned, I also grew up rural in rural Michigan. Sort of claim to fame as like the biggest pickle distributor, one of the largest pickle distributors in the United States, and a lot of sugar beets, But just before I get into my presentation, in listening to the presentation so far, we talked about the digital equity. I have a house in rural Michigan, and I live in, I have worked in downtown Chicago, or we're based in downtown Chicago. But when the pandemic hit, I moved out there. I couldn't have continued to work out there and do my job without the letter writing campaign it took to bring in high-speed internet. Before the pandemic, it wasn't, and there was no way I could have done my job out there without that. But it took letter writing campaign after letter writing campaign to actually bring it to where my house is out there. So I hear you when you all talk about this. NEF, on the other hand, does sort of one thing. We are a low-income housing tax credit syndicator. In 1997 or 1987, LIHTC saw that there was going to be a need to bring in an organization or create an organization that could help their nonprofits across the country access the low-income housing tax credit equity that was going to be available, or it was going to go just to the for-profits that were out there working in this sector. So they created NEF. And predominantly, we worked with predominantly we worked with nonprofits up until about 2000. In 2000, we opened it up to work both with nonprofits and for-profits, so long as it continued to forward the NEF mission, which you see here. And now to date, we've done about 18.3 billion, about 3,000 tax credit developments, and over 200,000 units of affordable housing throughout the country. We are one of the largest tax credit syndicators in the country. We are definitely the largest non-bank backed syndicator in the country, and we're definitely the largest nonprofit syndicator in the country. And the way our sort of finances work, and Kevin can talk better about this sometimes because he was the CFO of LIHTC or of NEF for a long time. But at the end of the day, the profits that NEF makes actually flow back up to LIHTC to continue the LIHTC work throughout communities in the country, and many of them rural. Next slide, please. I'm going to just show you a handful of projects that we've done throughout the country to kind of give you a sense of where we're working and what we're doing. This is Apalachicola in Florida. It's done with Windover, which is a longtime repeat for-profit sponsor with NEF, with Bank of America as the end investor. Windover has done a lot in the rural communities, and we continue to work with them in rural communities. They are sort of our Bank of America partner. We typically partner with an end investor and create that relationship so that when a group goes into a rural community or goes into a different community, that investor will follow them because they've got that connection, that relationship. And Windover and Bank of America have created that relationship with NEF. The next one, please. This just happens to be a personal favorite, and quite frankly, I oversee the originations work throughout the country. I asked my originators. I've got 3 different team leaders running through different sections of the country. If you got it into thirds, and I have gotten about 30 emails from Emily Chen this morning with updates on why I should like this project the best out of all of them. But REPCO is a long-time NEF and rural LIHTC sponsor. This one just happens to be in Kensington, New York, or Kingston, New York, and is one of the first net zero developments in New York, and definitely in rural New York. Next slide, just a little bit more on this. All of the utilities, the electricity and the heating and cooling are paid through the solar array and the geothermal system in this building. So for the tenants who live here, their expenses are much lower than they would be for other folks in rural developments. And here are just some of the awards that Energy Square has won over the last year or so. Next slide, please. Mountain Lake in rural Maryland, again, another rural LISC affiliate with the Garrett County Community Action Committee. I heard, and I took all these notes during the other presentations. The problem is I didn't take them in any particular order. But I think Chad mentioned earlier the idea of both sort of preservation in rural communities as well as sort of doing new construction. And this was a preservation project that was going to go market rate, and with the help of Garrett County Community Action Committee, we kept it affordable and rehabbed it for individuals making somewhere between 30 and 60% of area median income. Next slide, please. This is sort of an interesting one because it is two phases. One farm worker, one senior. In the Catholic Charities Housing Services, Yakima in Washington State, has about 23 stabilized projects. They are long-term, again, NEF repeat sponsor and developer, predominantly doing workforce housing in rural communities. So, and again, a new construction project for these particular areas. Next slide, please. Plateau Ridge, again, a longtime NEF sponsor and was for a list, National Church Residences in Cleburne, Texas. You know, often doing rural deals in Texas gets a little bit more difficult. And I'll explain that when we get to one of the very last slides, but what makes it difficult to do rural projects. But National Church has been very successful at both preserving and creating new affordable housing in rural communities for seniors. And this project happened to be done by, interestingly enough, a woman who was my analyst at the very beginning and now heads up the development work for National Church in Texas. So very happy to be working with Tracy again. Again, another adaptive reuse. This was done in Ontario, Oregon. This was the adaptive reuse of congregate care facility into affordable housing for often it's workforce, but it's just affordable housing for folks in Ontario. I just love it'll be interesting to see it when it's done, but I like the layout of the project. It's kind of fun. Next slide. So this one is, and this is where I'll get into a little bit more of the details. So these are the units that have been created by NEF doing rural projects in the last 5 years. Sort of proud of that work, but when you look at that, you'll see that big swath, through the country that where we haven't done units in the last 5 years. Now, that's not to say that we have not done projects in all of those states. NEF is in 48 states. So if anybody has a deal in Delaware or Alaska, please give me a call. I'd like to check those off my list. But you'll see that there's this big swath. Well, after the sort of the tax reform that happened in 2017, many of the large financial institutions decided that it was much easier to do deals and meet their CRA requirements by doing the larger deals. And so NEF followed suit, and we followed where our investors wanted to invest, and they wanted to invest in large deals. Large deals typically happen to be urban deals. And so we followed, but then took a look after a couple of years about where we are and where we haven't been, and NEF's commitment to working in rural communities, and said there's a problem here when there's this part of the country that we haven't touched much of. Again, we have done deals in those states in urban areas, but not rural recently, but decided that this wasn't right. And so to that end, we have hired 3 different individuals, one that will cover in the plain states, one that will cover the mountain states, and one that will cover the Southeast, so that we know that we are actually touching all of the country, not just the urban areas, but making a real commitment to touch the rural areas and those places that we haven't in the last 5 years. So there are 3 new individuals that all have been hired or moved up in our organization During COVID, I actually met Mark Fury, who is based in Florida, but will be handling the Southeast for the very first time. He's been here for about 10 months. I met him for the very first time about 2 weeks ago. So that was kind of interesting. I got to see an employee who works for me in 3D for the first time. But he will be handling the Southeast. Peter Masters, again, will be handling the Plain States. And we have had a number of conversations with Rural List, with Caitlin and Michael, about making sure that we are working with List closely to hit those states and work with those developers that that can actually bring projects to NEF and to fruition in rural America. The slides that didn't get in, and I apologize for this, are just a little bit of again, the difficulty in doing rural deals when you're talking with investors. You know, we looked at a project in rural Montana. It was on the border of Idaho, but it was the smallest county by population in the state. And trying to convince investors to do a deal where that's the first thing they hear about is very difficult. So what my folks have to do, it's not hard to do a deal in San Francisco. People know San Francisco. It's not hard to do a deal in Illinois. People understand Chicago and New York and that sort of thing. But when you're doing a deal in a rural area that people don't understand, it means that you have to know it better than anybody else. That it means you have to go do the site visit. You have to tour that community. It's hard to convince people. And I know this to be a fact because my father did it growing up. I'm sure, Kevin, you can understand this, and Lisa, you can understand this. But, you know, my father didn't work in the county that we lived in. You know, driving 40 miles to go to a grocery store or go to your job isn't unheard of, and it's not out of the ordinary. And so learning that and being able to go in and tell your investor that I've been there, I've seen it, I understand how it works is important, which takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of money to actually get out there. It's, you know, it's hard to drive Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas and go out and see the entire area. But we're making that commitment to do that because that's what you have to do to convince investors that those are the deals that you want to work with. You know, I'm gonna sort of move off this for a second, and you can move to the next slide if you'd like. Just my contact information. But the thing that has us, you know, somebody mentioned at the very beginning, talking with Kate and with Lisa, what you're thinking of for the next 12 months. And, you know, the interesting thing right now, oh, and Tony mentioned sort of effective deployment. What's got NEF thinking, and what we brought up in our recent board meeting, is that the low-income housing tax credit program had an estimated like $18.4 billion worth of equity that went into the market 2020 and earlier. That was about the size of our industry. However, what's recently happened, and it's all good stuff, but it has us thinking, and there is no answer to this right now. But it does have us really thinking about this. You know, the market cleared when it was an $18.4 billion industry. In 2020, the fixes were, you know, the 4% tax credit rate was fixed at 4%. That effectively raised our $18.4 billion industry by $2.2 billion. So about a 12% increase in the available credits out there. What we know happened with just that bump is that the returns went up to entice more investors to come into the market to clear it, and the pricing went down for the credits because of that increase. So the just basic supply and demand right now is that there are a lot of credits out there in the market, and people are saying, fine, I'll buy them, but you're going to have to raise my return to get there. I need, you know, I'm an economic buyer, not a CRA buyer, so you've got to do that. The second thing that's happening in 2020 is the amount of, and again, I think Kate touched on this in a really significant way, is that we had about 13 states, might be 14 states, that issue disaster credits because of flooding, because of hurricanes, because of wildfires. And this is a one-time infusion, but that one-time infusion is just now hitting the market. California just announced a huge amount of disaster credits that are coming into the market right now, predominantly in rural communities. But that's another $1.6 billion of equity that is going to be needed to clear that part of the equation. So you've now increased it, about $3.5 billion from your 18. The next thing that's popping in is the current plan coming out of the federal government is to increase the 9% credits by 12.5% per year for the next 4 years. That's triggering an annual additional need of about $1.7 billion in equity starting in 2022 through 2025. So this is sort of a 5-year bump in credits that that will go up another 12.5%. So what we know happened with the 4% fixed rate and now with the disaster credits is returns went up and pricing is going down to bring in those economic investors to help clear this market. So that's proposed right now. In addition, the proposal is to change the 4% 50% test, meaning 50% of, you have to use 50%, you have to finance 50% of your development with 4% credits. The change proposed is just to take that down to 25%, which would again bring a need of approximately $7.1 billion of additional equity into the market to clear it. Again, right now, driving returns up to bring in economic investors and driving pricing down. Now, we have CRA reform out there. There's a possibility that could change some of this, that could drive, help balance this market out a little bit. We've got the proposed possible corporate tax rate increase, which could drive CRA and credit buyers to need more credits. So there's that possibility. It's out there. There is no real answer for it, but there are a couple of, but those are the things that have NEF sort of thinking right now. The other thing that's got us thinking is that since the end of 2020, there have been 8 bank mergers involving the top 250 banks in the market. And so, in some of these cases, it will end up being a good thing that will drive the need up for those particular banks. In some cases, it may drive it down. It's hard to know what those mergers will look like, and it's hard to know what mergers may come in the future. So there's a lot to be considered. So when you're thinking about the credit and how to use it in your communities, that becomes an issue. 2 more things, that only because I picked them up in the questions from the previous sessions. Skilled developers, a lot of you'll notice on my slides, a lot of the developers who are working in rural communities are large repeat developers. It is harder to sell to an end investor a brand new developer. Often what we will ask is that if you're a new developer or a smaller developer and you're looking to do something in your community, and that typically tends to be rural communities, that you contact us early, and we'll talk about whether or not, as an organization, that it is something I can sell to an end investor, or whether we have to create an amicable partnership. And my goal is to make sure that if we have to create a partnership with some of the organizations, RUPCO and Wendover and National Insurance, some of the folks that you just saw on the slides, that we're creating something that is going to work for you. That's something that's, the tax credit program, a tax credit deal is a marriage you're getting into, that you're going to get divorced at the end of 15 years. So you want to know who you're marrying for that 15 years and getting to know them up front and making sure that your needs and your desires are aligned is really important. And then I'm going to switch completely right now because somebody also mentioned if there was any list or list affiliate actually targeting Black businesses. NEF has just started its Emerging Minority Developer Fund. This is about $110 million fund that is designed to help emerging minority developers, and that is any group that has typically been disenfranchised because of race in this country, to help build wealth and help build capacity. So it is looking at organizations, developers that may have worked with another development company or may have been a co-developer for years in their community that wants to become a developer and do it on their own, so that the developer fees associated with this, the economics associated with the tax credit deal, actually end up back with the minority developer, as opposed to often what we refer to as the deep pocket partner that came in only to stand behind guarantees. So NEF has committed funds both to help support emerging minority developers in maybe organizational capacity building, maybe asset management, maybe construction oversight, as well as using our balance sheet to backstop the guarantees for the end investor, to see that the economics of the project end up with that minority developer. So with that, my mouth is really dry, so I'm going to take a break, and Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mike and Kevin. We do have a number of questions that have appeared. I'm going to start with a fairly easy one. It's directed at Kevin, I think, but it applies to both Mike and Kevin, and that is, I've got a project. Who do I talk to about taking a look at it, either at LISC or at NEF or New Markets? I'll say from rural LISC perspective, if you're a rural LISC partner, you have a program officer assigned to you, they're always a good resource to start with, and they can help connect you to the right person at either NEF or New Markets. But Kevin or Mike, do you have a particular way you want to be contacted for potential deals?
I'll start, Kevin, if you want. The way that the originations department is set up at NEF is that, again, we're split into 3 different regions. East region, working Canada to Cuba, Mountain Range to the Atlantic. I should actually say either Puerto Rico or the US Virgin Islands, because we do have deals in both of those locations. Then the Central region, in between Mountain Ranges, Canada and Mexico, and then the Rockies to the Pacific, Canada to Mexico, the West region. Each one of those regions has a team leader, Todd Fabian in the West, who's based in LA, Rachel Rhodes in the Central region, who is based in Chicago, and Emily Chen in the East region, who is based in New York. But all of them have originators underneath of them that are spread throughout the country. Each one of those originators is assigned to a state. That way we make sure that we have sort of a regional expert. I cannot know every QAP out there. They're charged with doing that. Again, Michael is correct. If you are a rural LISC affiliate, you can go through your LISC contact and they can put you in touch with the individual that is in that particular area, but you can always contact me and I will direct you accordingly from there.
Great, thanks, Mike. Kevin?
Yeah, and same holds for me. I mean, as Michael Carroll said, always go to your rural LISC contact, but also feel free to reach out to me and my team at NMSC. I didn't include my team's contact info, so definitely can reach out to me directly with any project opportunities, and I'll get it to the right person on my team. The 2 folks I'd likely be sending it to, Mark King, who's our Chief Lending Officer, and then Don Anuncio, who leads our New Markets tax credit investing team.
Great, thanks. Another question from Anonymous. What distinguishes NEF and a New Market Support Company from other investors, syndicators? Real softball for you guys.
Kevin, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so as it relates to the new markets tax credit industry and the work that we do with LISC CDE, we're really differentiated because of you all and because of our local LISC programs around the country. So the whole idea of being a recipient of these new markets tax credits is that you have the ties to the projects and to what is needed and wanted by these communities. And so we have that through our boots on the ground across the country. And so that's really been our key to success. Then as it relates to the rest of our business and our fund services work that we do, we're really differentiated by a couple things. One, we've got a full investment platform, and the way that we offer our services is really on a customized basis, as capacity boosters and gap fillers for our partners. And then the second is that we have an impact team of 4 folks at NMSC and are really working hard to integrate impact throughout the financial and the investment process for every fund that we manage or administer. And that differentiates us from other fund administrator or fund partners out there.
Great. Mike?
You're on mute, Mike.
That would help. There was a siren going by. That urban living kind of thing. What differentiates NEF, I think, is our LISC affiliation. NEF has never been in the business of trying to make money on the back end of the deal. Our fees, what keeps our lights on, what provides the list to, or the grant to list at the end of every year, is what we generate in fees upfront. There are a huge number of people, and you may have heard about aggregators and some of the folks doing that, that are trying to make money on the back end of every deal. That has never been the NEF model. Our model is to make sure that we make, as much as we can, maintain the long-term affordability of the project. So that's, I think, a huge differentiation. The other thing is that we cut our teeth working with nonprofits housing the hardest to house, both rural and urban. And so we understand how to do it, and our investors understand that NEF knows how to do that. So when we're trying to explain a particular deal, when we're trying to explain a particular subsidy, our investors understand that that's what we do. The other thing to think about, and and this is a safe place for me to say this, I've been on other panels and I have to really couch this, but take a look at the syndication firms that are out there. Take a look at who owns them. If you are working with a direct bank, is your banker, the one that you did the deal with, going to be the same person who's there at the end of the deal? Are they going to be there in year 15 when you need to talk to them? Are the bank's priorities going to be the same in year 15 as they were when you first invested? Or are they going to sell that investment off because they don't need it on their books anymore? When you're working with some of the for-profit organizations, take a look at the ownership structure. We just saw this happen with, and I'm going to call them out, with Boston Capital, a very good player in the market, great reputation in the market, and just sold to Boston Financial. Alliant out there, and just sold to Walker Dunlap, because those folks who own those syndication shops have to have an exit strategy. And then you have to wonder what the priorities are going to be for that new owner. NEF is not going to be sold unless Lisa Glover has something she hasn't told us all. I'm pretty sure the NEF is going to be the same NEF that it's been for the last 35 years, for the next 35 years, as long as the tax credit program is out there. I may not be here, but there'll be somebody like me with the same priorities as I've got and the rest of NEF has, sitting in this chair. Well, I hope to be here for the next at least 10 years, but hopefully there'll be somebody here sitting in this chair with the exact same priorities we've had for, again, the last 35 years.
Great, thank you. Question for you both from Pamela. How are you dealing with rising costs and labor shortages, driven by the pandemic? kind of a broad question, but
This has been
Yeah.
sort of a huge thing for us, and Kevin, and I assume it is for you as well. You know, when you put in a tax credit application, you have your contractor go through, kind of give you rough estimates, you know, cost it out, put it in there, and then, you know, it takes 4 or 5 months before you get an allocation, and then another 3 to 6 months to actually get the deal closed. In that time, there can be all kinds of changes. We saw it happen with lumber, where all of a sudden lumber prices were through the roof, and you're going through cost engineering, you're going back to the state to look for more soft money, you're banging on the Federal Home Loan Doors Bank, trying to find an additional grant money. And we're, you know, typically NEF is sitting there with you, working on that same project, you know, holding your hand and trying to get you through it as we look for ways to actually cover those costs.
And same with our new markets tax credit investments, you know, and it really just involves working more closely with our partners and making sure that there is the enough capital and reserves in these deals to get through any unforeseen cost increases from a new project perspective, and then just from a portfolio perspective, and from, you know, the businesses in our portfolio that are suffering from labor shortages and supply chain issues and other things. You know, we are again working closely with them to make sure that we can keep their debt service at a level that's going to get them through this time.
okay, great. Question from Timothy. This is for Mike. I think I know the answer to this. Was the Mountain Lake property that you showed, was that a 515?
Originally, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of the preservation work that we do in rural communities started out as RD deals. You know, a lot of those owners who may have had a portfolio of 20 or 30 RD deals at one point, you know, have aged out and now want out of that. And we have worked very hard to make sure that we help preserve those and update them. It was very difficult. You know, I sort of, when I first started, I cut my teeth on doing RD deals through Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan. And it's, you know, at the time, the RD program wasn't really aligned with the tax credit program. So it was a little bit difficult. It's gotten a little bit better. It's a little easier to blend the two, but it took a lot of work to actually make those deals work initially. And again, a lot of it is the RD office in that particular region, and how, you know, how good they are and how much they understand the low income housing tax credit program. But yes, it was indeed an RD deal to begin with.
Great, thank you. And while you have the floor, Lee asked, I think you answered this in your remarks. Lee says he doesn't see a Puerto Rico on your map, but I think you do have.
You just don't see Puerto Rico on the map because, and I was beginning to type the answer in there. You don't see Puerto Rico on the map because we just haven't done a deal in Puerto Rico in the last 5 years. But on the flip side of that, the allocations in Puerto Rico and there's not been any CDBG DR money even released from Puerto Rico yet. I have attended the SOMOS conference, you know, 3 times now. I plan to be down there in November, at the beginning of November. The conference goes off again. To sort of remain at the forefront of what's going on in Puerto Rico, so that when those funds begin to be released, we're ready to hit the ground running. Again, also talking a little bit, there are, you don't see it on the map, but that doesn't mean we haven't been talking to developers that are in Puerto Rico who have plans and projects sort of ready to go when funding is available. Some of which are capable of actually doing developments on their own, some of which need, you know, some help. The 2 projects that we've done down there are, you know, with New York-based groups who have gone down to Puerto Rico to help rebuild in different stages. So connecting those groups together, the nonprofits together, to actually get deals done down there is important. It's also looking for the rental subsidies and that sort of thing to make deals in Puerto Rico work. So it's not easy to do them, but we're up to the challenge and plan to continue to work in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Great. So a number of questions here about scale that I'm going to try to synthesize into a question for you both, and that is, for example, with housing developments, 20 units and under is, something that happens frequently in rural America. Do you have a minimum investment size, and or do you have strategies for getting investors interested in those kinds of projects? And then after Mike speaks about affordable housing, I'd like to hear from Kevin about how the New Markets program works, and people tend to think of that as large investment projects, but how you're dealing with scale and size in rural projects. So long question, sorry, but Mike, do you have thoughts about scale?
For us, it's hard to make. It's not that we haven't done them, but it's hard for us to make a deal that's under $3 million in equity work. It gets very difficult to make the economics work in that. It's also very difficult to get an investor interested. Typically a small deal like that, and again, it's not that we haven't done them, and we will, especially if we're working with a rural list group, we will do them, but they typically go into multi-funds because you'll just never get a proprietary investor and just one single investor. You saw Bank of America and Morgan Stanley, they're considered proprietary investors because they have individual funds. But a multi-fund is made up of a group of different investors, and we put a handful of deals into that fund. You can typically slide it into that. It just means that the pricing is going to be slightly lower. So it's while we're a lot more flexible with a multi-fund, the pricing tends to be a little bit lower, which makes the economics of a small deal very difficult. My suggestion, if you have a smaller deal like that, is to contact us early. Let us help work through the numbers. Let us try to shop that. Let us try to find one of the many funds that we do annually, trying to find a home for it. Because depending on where it's located throughout the United States will depend on my ability to actually find an investor for it.
Great, thanks, Mike. Kevin?
Yeah, and so on the new market side of things, with the traditional standalone new market tax credit investments, generally speaking, they're 10 million or greater in size. 5 million or greater can get done, and just with those deals, everyone, you need to be working with partners that are really cautious of the costs of the attorneys and accountants and consultants on those projects, because you can really start eating into the subsidy with all those transaction costs. And so it makes those smaller projects doable, but more difficult. And then, the small loan funds that we put together are one way to drive down the transaction size without eating into the subsidy by having to pay those attorneys and accountants on every transaction. And so, certainly more of that needed across rural America. And, I think the sort of call to action in all this is that, a lot of the rural new markets deals that get done are the larger ones, because there's a world of development consultants, bulk B consultants, as we call them in our world, that's out there trying to find those transactions that they can be supported by CDs and allocation and can get done. And frankly, if they're larger, those folks make more money and it makes their jobs easier. So I think what really is needed with rural new markets investments is to bring these worlds of the new markets industry and all of you in the rural CDs and CDFIs and USDA lenders together, so that the new markets industry becomes aware of more projects outside of just the deals that get put together by these consultants, and so more small projects can get done.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I also want to go back to, in your presentation, you mentioned the Growing Rural Fund that was a success. And I was really glad to hear you reached out to me this week to talk about setting up another one of those and really inviting our participants and our partners to think about what kinds of small loan structures are needed in rural. And if you have specific ideas about how we can structure that product together with new markets, please reach out to either I or Kevin. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we've been, a lot of our small loan fund activity of late in urban markets has been working around the SBA 504 program, and with our both wealth creation and quality accessible job mandates, trying to get the benefit of real estate ownership to more entrepreneurs, and especially minority and Black entrepreneurs. And so that's one area where we would love to hear from you all in the field as to whether there's opportunity in that market to drive down costs, or whether it's dealing with loan to value type issues to get more real estate ownership to entrepreneurs. Yeah, we'd love to get any thoughts that are out there in terms of the best way to use this new markets subsidy in rural markets. As I mentioned, there's suddenly hundreds of millions of more capital that's going to be going into rural markets with NMTC subsidy, and so now's the time for innovation in terms of what is the right tool to meet the need in your communities.
Great, thanks. Just another question about who the right person is to talk to about low-income investment LIHTC deals in New England. And I think, Mike, you mentioned your regional person. Is it Emily who covers?
Right. So Emily Chen is the team leader. Emily handles New York and New Jersey herself. Then Tony Lyons, who has been with NEF for 24 years, handles sort of the rest of Greater New England. Again, I can put you in touch with both Tony and Emily. Just get in touch with me. I think that my email is posted someplace on this.
Yeah, both yours and Kevin's are on the presentation decks, and those will be made available for all of our participants, as well as recording of this event. I think we really are getting close to the end of our time here. I feel like we could do another hour, just like the last session. I think we could have done another hour, but thanks, Kevin and Mike, for this great informative session and for making yourselves available to our rural partners. We know you're committed to rural, and we thank you for that. And I think with that, we're going to
Michael,
go.
let me answer, if you don't mind, let me answer one last question, because in looking at the questions, it's come up twice.
Okay.
I personally understand this, that there are some communities where developments, 12 to 15 units or less than 20 units, that's what's really needed, right? That's what's needed in that particular town or that particular community. Somebody asked, other than convincing investors to do a small deal like that, which again gets heavily underwritten with large vacancy rates and that sort of thing. In the event that you have 2 units that are down, your vacancy pops up. But somebody asked about aggregating. That's the way we do a lot of the rural development projects. The first deal that I ever worked on were 13 different rural development projects in 13 different counties throughout Ohio. We did the same thing on 8 different properties in Wisconsin, 12 different properties that were in Minnesota. So aggregating, bringing them together, they can be scattered, say, bringing them together to make a larger project often is a really good way to get a lot of preservation or a lot of housing done in rural areas at the same time. But it sometimes takes making partnerships or getting into a partnership to actually do that. Great,
thanks, Mike. We really are going to have to wrap this up. We're going to head into a break, but do come back, because at 12:30 Central, we're going to have a great panel with U.S. Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack, Ms. Carroll Stern, Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation, Marvin Ellison, the CEO of Lowe's Companies, and Justin Maxson, who's a USDA Undersecretary for Rural Development. So please do come back at the end of the break, and I am reminded that you should also check out the lobby of this virtual web conference program and look for the virtual coins scattered around. And if you find them all and get up on our leaderboard, you're going to get some great swag from Rural LIHTC. So look forward to seeing you in about half an hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.